You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Brendan Cole. It's something that both Jews and Muslims can agree on. Campaigners for the rights of Denmark's Muslims and Jews have presented the country's agriculture minister, that's Dan Jorgensen, with a 17,000 signature petition calling for the reinstatement of ritual killing, which he has now prohibited. He introduced the legislation saying that animal rights come before religion. This prohibition makes it more difficult for Denmark's 200,000 Muslims to source halal meat, where the animal is killed by having its throat cut. In addition, the country's 6,000 Jews import kosher meat, but were also outraged. A similar ban is in force in Sweden and Norway, as well as other European nations, but not the United Kingdom. The ban was called anti-Semitic by Israel's Deputy Minister of Religious Services. Similarly, the Danish non-profit group Danish Halal decried the ban as a clear infringement of religious freedom. Do animal rights trump religious ones? Well, to discuss this and the issues surrounding it, I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Ed West. He's the deputy editor of the Catholic Herald, and he also writes for the Spectator. Also here is Shimon Cohen, who is campaign director of Shechita UK, and also here in the studio is Masood Khawaja, who is director of Halal Consultations Limited. On the line from Denmark, I'm joined by Mirja Thompson, who is the founder and chairman of the Organisation Against the Suffering of Animals, that's OASA, that's based in Denmark. A warm welcome to you all. Mirja, can I just go to you first? What is your reaction to this new law?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel discussion. I would like to start by saying that my point of view in this debate is solely related to animal welfare. And it is on the basis of that solely that I welcome and support the ban of ritual slaughter here in Denmark. My is that animal slaughter should be a purely practical procedure, always with the focus on minimizing the stress and pain of the individual animal. When that's said, this new law is actually only a technicality because the past 10 years, animal has been stunned before being slaughtered, and no one has objected for the past 10 years. So animal welfare and freedom of religion has been living side by side in Denmark for the past 10 years without any problems. And it is only now, when the government has turned a practice into a law, that it suddenly has become an issue. So this is a political decision based on considerations of animal welfare in which Denmark is not the first mover, as you also mentioned in the beginning. You know, the ritual slaughter has been banned already, as you said, in Norway, Sweden, Poland, and Switzerland. So actually, this is just a technicality.
Shimon Cohen, just a technicality, and I suppose that the point is that 6,000 Jews in Denmark already get their meat sourced from overseas anyway. In practical terms, this doesn't actually make that much of a difference. Although, do you see it as more of a symbolic ban?
Well, I think it's much more important than that. And I think, first of all, the rather silly point that Denmark is only doing what Norway and Sweden did is silly, because Norway and Sweden did that in the 1930s when anti-Semitism could not have been higher and when the Nazi laws were sweeping across Europe. So for Denmark to suddenly say 75 years later it's only doing what its neighbours did is silly and somewhat disingenuous. This is a very troubling point, because we're constantly being told that it has something to do with animal welfare. It has nothing to do. It can't possibly have anything to do with animal welfare because, as our friend from Denmark said, there has been no kosher slaughter in Denmark for 10 years. The slaughter conducted by the Muslim community is done with an acceptable and non-penetrative stunning method that is acceptable to certain Muslims. So not a single animal's life is going to be improved by this. Yet tens of thousands of Jews and Muslims, Europe over, have been insulted by this, yet not a single animal's life has been bettered. It's fascinating to know that the 200,000 Muslims that you referred to in Denmark, there are 180,000 people in Denmark with hunting licenses. Yet it seems for some strange reason that the Muslim and Jewish community have been targeted in this rather odd way and have been told rather publicly that their rights come second to the rights of animals.
Mirja, do you understand that, I guess, for a lot of people, this feels like a symbolic ban? If this has already been in place effectively in practical terms for 10 years, this won't actually make one little difference or one little bit of difference, the argument goes, in terms of alleviating animal suffering in Denmark.
Well, I could say, and I will say, that things were going really well. This law has been this has been going on for 10 years. So of course, I'm happy as an animal welfare campaigner. I think it's a good law because there is not any possibilities anymore to slaughter animals without stunning them prior to the slaughter. But of course, things were going really well. It was not an issue. So maybe we didn't need the law. But still, I don't get what is all the fuss about, because again, it is really just a technicality. We've just formed it as a law now, but it hasn't been a problem for the last 10 years. No one has said anything. No one has objected for the past 10 years. So why now? Just because it suddenly has been formed by a law or as a law.
Okay, well, Masood Khawaja, you're Director of Halal Consultations Limited. I mean, what's your response to that? Presumably, the country's Muslims will still get their halal meat. They'll just have to find other ways of doing it.
Well, you see, it is a good opportunity for us to learn that people and some countries there are in the world who are still anti-religion as such, simply because the very fact is this, that I can talk about the Muslim theology, that Allah has allowed us in Quran to eat animal, four-legged animal, permissible animal and birds, but He has said that for your own sustenance and nourishment, you have to kill them in a separate and a very specific way. And the specific way is this, that the animal is not dead prior to slaughter, all the flowing blood is drained out, and someone does the rendition of Shahada, meaningly invoking the name of Allah. So if we take the first thing, that the animal is not dead prior to slaughter, it means that no human being actually eats anything which has died on its own accord as such. And as far as the flowing blood is concerned, it contains a lot of bacteria and everything else. I do not have to go into it, but that is one of the reasons. Exactly, the Jewish Shechita and kosher is the same way done. But here the impossibility is this, that there are some people who will still say they equate the stunning and everything else to animal welfare. I have been in England here for 53 years now, and the slaughtering up to about 25 years ago in England as well, which is one of the prominent EU country, it was done on cradles. And an animal used to suffer more at the time than they suffer under the Jewish law and the Muslim law as far as the slaughtering is concerned. So I think someone somewhere is getting it wrong to say that just because animals are being eaten that way or the slaughtering being done that way. And now was one of the other programs where they said in the Islamic way, animal suffers more. Animal doesn't suffer more, because what they take is if the animal is convulsing after the throat is cut, they think that is the animal welfare being impaired in one way or the other.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Brendan Cole. We're discussing the ban on halal and kosher meat being produced in Denmark. To discuss this, I'm joined in the studio by Ed West, who is the deputy editor of the Catholic Herald. He also writes for the Spectator. Also here is Shimon Cohen. He's director of Shechita UK. That's the organisation that campaigns for the awareness of the Jewish method for slaughtering animals. In the studio joining me is Masood Khawaja, who is director of the group Halal Consultations. And on the line from Denmark is Mirja Thompson, who is founder of the Organisation Against the Suffering of Animals, or OASA. OK, and on this animal, I will bring you in a minute, Ed. I just want to carry on with this animal welfare line. There is that point, though, Mirja. I mean, do you have any kind of evidence that suggests that stunning is any less cruel? The point that the Muslim and the Jewish community would make is that actually the ritual religious slaughter of animals is perfectly... the animal doesn't suffer, the animal dies immediately, and they're highly trained slaughterers themselves who undergo years and years of training.
I could bring some authorities, counting actually the UK-based Farm Animal Welfare Council, conclude that it can take up to 2 minutes for the cattle to bleed to death, resulting in considerable pain and stress for the individual animal. And I do recognize, of course, that opinion on this issue, even studies show varying and even divergent results. But I think that any practice should consistently rest on the most reliable contemporary scientific data. So
But the stunning of animals there is a significant proportion of animals that are mis-stunned, so they have to be shot twice, and this causes suffering. And something like 9% of animals here in the UK, of around 3 million animals, are mis-stunned each year. So here we have hundreds of thousands of animals that are suffering, even though they have been stunned.
Yeah, I do. I know that there are many possible, focal points within animal welfare. That's that we are working for. But I think that none of them excludes the other. And I think that when we have for instance, the Farm Animal Welfare Council stating that the animals suffer from the bleeding, then we have to take that into consideration when discussing animal welfare.
Shimon.
The report that we've just heard from with regard to the Farm Animal Welfare Council did indeed say what the lady has said it said. However, the government rejected each and every one of those findings because the government said there was no conclusive scientific evidence to support that contention. There is, in fact, an ample body of science which shows that the Jewish religious humane method of slaughtering animals for food is at least as humane as all the other methods. The other point which is very important to make is that we mustn't use emotive phrases like ritual slaughter, which conjures up something rather peculiar. This is about religious slaughter. We shouldn't use phrases like throat cut, because if we use phrases like throat cut, we have to understand that the only legal method of slaughtering an animal for food in the United Kingdom is to cut its throat. It doesn't matter what faith you are, there is no other way of doing it. What is important to understand is that the process involved in conventional slaughter involves mechanical stunning of animals, which includes a number of different methods. It includes the gassing of pigs, which are gassed to asphyxiation. It includes the electrocution of poultry, where poultry is held upside down on a wire and dipped into a bath of water with an electric current running through it. We include the captive bolt shot into the head of a cow to crack its brain so that it could be stunned. All of these methods are prior to the throat being cut. What the Jewish method does is it avoids all of that. It is a method that is very swift and very effective, and it severs the vital organs at the neck of the animal, reduces the blood pressure in the brain instantly, because again, this is not about death. The law says that animals have to be rendered unconscious immediately, and the Shechita method results in an immediate and irreversible cessation of consciousness, a sensibility to pain. It incorporates an effective and irreversible stun. It doesn't involve all of these nasty mechanical methods that go wrong so often.
Ed West, where does this fit into the animal welfare debate, do you think? Are we focusing on the wrong? Is Denmark focusing on the wrong particular thing? Because what was invoked there was the slaughter of battery chickens and animals and so on. These are the real animal welfare debates that we should be having, do you think?
Well, my brother, who is an atheist and a vegetarian, used to always laugh at people who would sort of make a fuss about halal meat, because he used to say that most likely they were eating something that was killed in a far crueler way. And that was Britain in the 90s. I believe that animal welfare has got a bit better since then. But, without getting into the other issues of animal welfare, I mean, I don't think that this sort of Danish campaign is motivated by anti-Semitism or hostility to Islam. I think, Denmark does have a very, very good record on human rights, and on, it's one of the most liberal countries in the world. It's the home of Borgen, after all. On the other hand, I think this is one example where sometimes it's best to have a fudge and not to make something official. As she said, it was understood that this was the case, and now we've just made it official. But it's actually the act of making it official that I think makes people nervous. I mean, my main objection to this is, when I've spoken to Jews and Muslims in Britain, they feel, as a minority, this is one of those things that makes them very, very nervous, that their freedom of religion as a minority in a liberal society is sort of fundamentally at threat when something like this comes along. And I think even if the issue was animal welfare, and I perfectly believe your argument there, either way, I think the issues of minority rights would trump it in this case.
And so on that note, when Rabbi Pinchas Goldschmidt, who's the president of the Conference of European Rabbis, makes the point that pressure is being put on religious freedoms, this could end up in a clash of civilizations. Do you think that's over-egging it a bit? Do you see? You say that you don't see this as a kind of an infringement of religious freedoms necessarily.
I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it was intended as such. No, but it has that. Certainly in Britain there is a lot of, base support for restrictions on halal based on, hostility to Muslims. But I don't think you should judge any any idea or plan by its kind of, by its worst supporters. But, clash of civilizations is a pretty heavy phrase. But it's definitely, there's a conflict between a sort of basically an atheist secular majority in Europe now and all religions. Islam probably most of all. But there's a generation who just have no everyday experience of religion. So lots of people's general attitude is, why should religious groups have these special exemptions? Why should they be allowed their own rules when all the rest of us have to do this? So there's a temptation to say everyone has to do it like this.
That's right, Masood. Why should there be exemptions? Do you see this as an attack on Islam?
Well, it is not only an attack on Islam, it is attack on their own theology, those people who want to ban this. Let me put it this way, that, when we talk about cutting throat, 1953 Act of Slaughtering of UK was based on cutting throat. 1974 Act was based on cutting throat. So it is not cutting throat of anything of this like. It is just, talking about Farm Animal Welfare Council as well. I have attended many meetings there as well. They do not say it is cruel, either the kosher one or the Muslim one. And this is one of the reasons in our own standards, in Halal Consultations, and also in the organization of which I was president earlier, we had put down there that the religion and science and technology can go side by side, as long as we do not have to compromise the religious ethos. Religious ethos is the same one which I mentioned earlier, that the animal is not dead prior to slaughter, all the flowing blood is drained out, and someone does the rendition of Shahada in the name of Allah there. Because this is what it is. If they think that is stunning of the animal is actually humane, they have to prove it. Simply because they're not able to prove it. I asked this question, this young lady who is speaking from there. If you talk about captive bolt on a cow, would anybody like to be actually treated like that the captive bolt is actually put to the brain goes to pieces, and the animal dies, and then you slaughter and you eat it? That is not the right way of doing it at all.
Shimon, the point that Rabbi Pinchas Goldschmidt made was that we are collateral damage. Very strong words. I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Well, I think to a large extent I would agree with him, and we are collateral damage, because in Denmark the Jewish community is so terribly small. It hasn't done Shechita in Denmark for over 10 years because the economics didn't make any sense. It was such a small community, yet we have now been stigmatized as some sort of cruel people probably because of the forthcoming European Union elections, where somewhat moderate politicians have got to show some sort of pandering to the right wing. But the point is an important point, I think, that individuals in a post-Second World War free Europe have rights. Groups have rights. In fact, in Denmark, 180,000 people have the right to go hunting and shooting birds and deer and things. They have rights. Apparently the Danish pig industry has rights as well. It has rights to flout European Commission law, and it has the right, apparently, under Danish law, to flout that law and continue to dock tails, live docking tails of pigs, so that they can be crammed into sheds and fight. They don't have enough space. They bite each other. So if you take the tails off, they're not going to bite each other's tails. Apparently the Danish pig farmers have those rights as well. But as the minister in Denmark said, Jews don't have the same rights. They have lower rights than animals.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Brendan Cole. We're discussing Denmark's ban on kosher and halal meat production with Ed West, Shimon Cohen, Masood Khawaja and Mirja Thompson. I'll put that to Mirja. What about the slaughter of animals at the end of their lives? How does that compare ethically than the way they are treated beforehand? From your organisation's perspective, that if they've had a terrible life beforehand, that's considerable cruelty being meted out there, isn't it?
Yes, I acknowledge and realise that this is just one specific issue of many that requires our attention. And that is why I and many others are looking into our habits and routines as consumers. And some decides to become vegetarians and vegans, or another way abstain from the consumption of meat. Other looked into animal testing and the production of cosmetic or the use of fur and leather in the clothing industry. So there are many possible focal points, none of which exclude the other.
But we could have chosen something, couldn't we? We could have chosen something that actually made a difference to animals. If we had chosen tail docking of pigs in Denmark, that would have made a difference to to thousands, tens of thousands, millions of pigs. But actually what you've done in Denmark is you've chosen to enact a law that makes not the slightest bit of difference to the single life of a single animal, because the process that you have now legislated against hasn't actually taken place in Denmark for over 10 years. So it can't possibly be from an animal welfare perspective.
Let me tell you something. If I made the laws, I would change all of that. But it's not me who are making the law. I am just an animal welfare campaigner. So that is what I do. I try to, of course, to influence the political decisions here in Denmark. But it's not me who are making the laws, unfortunately.
And what about the pig industry that Shimon refers to there? Denmark's a massive producer of that. And it seems that Dan Jorgensen is actually referred to the number of piglets that die a day in Danish factory farms. To 95%, as was mentioned there, have their tails docked. There's cruel and illegal practices going on there.
Yes.
Why wasn't that a focus for animal rights activists?
Well, it is a focus. This is indeed a focus point. But I'm just saying that, none of which excludes the others. So, of course, I am happy that we do something for the animals, and I would be more happy if we did, also think about the pigeons. But we don't. So.
But what precisely has this law done for animals? You did agree that seeing as there hasn't been a single animal slaughtered by the religious method, the Jewish religious method in Denmark for over 10 years. I'm interested to know that your campaign, because the minister said that he made his decision as a result of campaigning. So what have you been actually campaigning against? Or have you actually been not campaigning against pig farming because they're actually richer than the Jewish community? Or what is it about? Because not a single animal has had its life bettered by this rule that you've spent such a lot of time campaigning for animal welfare about. I don't understand what the animal welfare benefits of this new law are.
But we have not been campaigning against religious slaughter because, as I also said before, things were going really well. It was not an issue. So, as I said before, maybe we didn't need the law.
Okay,
as a matter of fact,
Masood, get your response to that.
As a matter of fact, I cannot work out whether the young lady is pro this law or against this law, simply because by provoking in this kind of way for the Jewish slaughter and the Muslim slaughter, the insult has been sort of thrown at people. Over 25 million Muslims, I can talk about in the European Union alone, and then it would be heard outside the European countries as well to say that the Muslim law of the slaughtering of animal is not accepted in there, or the Jewish law is not accepted there. It means it is anti-religious. As a matter of fact, right from the beginning of the Jewish religion or the Muslim religion, people have been eating lamb, sheep, and chicken in there, and I think it is because we do regard animal welfare one of the fundamental things in there, and that's how we are slaughtering our animal, and that no one can actually say that it is cruel to animal. What I had found here 30 years ago in UK itself, and I hope the UK does not actually do anything irrelevant like the Denmark has done, because I'm grateful to the British government. They always look after the animal welfare and religious slaughter.
Okay, Mirja, go ahead.
I would like to say that I really appreciate that you call me a young lady. I'm very flattered. So what I just said before is that the views behind the law, please turn to the minister. And when that's said, we still have some studies that shows that it can take up to 2 minutes for the cattle to bleed to death, and that it is resulting in considerable pain and stress for the animal. So that is why we think that is good, that is not possible anymore.
Okay. Ed, what's your view on what's going to happen throughout the European Union? There are several countries that already have this ban, and it was pointed out that the ban is in Norway and Sweden stems back for many generations. But under EU law, animals do have to be stunned. So effectively, Denmark is just following that diktat in a way, isn't it?
Yes, I mean Poland's also had it as well. I don't know how much to the extent we can blame Europe for. I mean, whether it would come to Britain, I don't really think that's ever going to happen.
So it's not an actual correct reading of the law. The law is very clear that Jews and Muslims have the right under the law not to use mechanical stunning methods. There is an exemption for Jews and Muslims.
That's right, and the British state recognises these religious requirements as rights. These are legally defined, protected by acts, of course.
Yeah.
But in terms of the transnational debate on this, where do you see it heading? Because a lot of people would say that this will hurt transnational attempts to bridge what animal rights advocates want and what religious groups want.
I think every country in Europe has these issues. There are two things happening. There's there's a Muslim population that's much bigger than it was, and also at the other end there is a native population which is much less religious. So you have these two. I wouldn't say clash of civilizations. It's just two different sort of ways of looking at the world. And it's funny, from the Christian sort of point of view, it's sort of like stuck in the middle, because we want to sort of have a public sphere which is as open as possible to everyone's point of view, so that these kind of restrictions don't apply to everyone. Personally, I'd be very surprised if this was to happen in Britain. We do have a slightly different political tradition than the continent.
And Britain will be a centre for halal and kosher production, I suppose. Will it?
Well, potentially so. I mean, the British government has, in successive years, reaffirmed Jews and Muslims' rights to freedom of religion and to prepare their meat in their traditional manner, and that isn't likely to change in this country. It's not likely to change in very many countries. Poland, there was an attempt. It's going through a legal challenge at the moment. It may or not come through. The far-right parties in the Netherlands tried the same thing some years ago. That was roundly defeated. Most of this is really a way of appeasing public hostility towards vast immigration that Europe has not really been able to cope with absorbing. And every now and again these things flare up. But without any conclusive scientific evidence to support one way or another, we maintain our position that the method that we use to slaughter animals for food is at least as humane as the other legal methods.
And Masood, does it perhaps it heightens awareness of religious practice and maybe a sense of self-identity among Muslims, does it?
Well, as a matter of fact, it does heighten, but it grieves me to say that there are still some people in one or two countries in the European Union and Europe, those who would be anti-religious as such. I mean, if you see in UK and elsewhere, the halal restaurant, there are 12,000 restaurants here in UK, the clientele, about 80% of it is local population. It means as far as the public is concerned, they go for cuisine and food. As far as the Muslims are concerned, they go for the religious injunctions according to Quran, where I mentioned about those three things in there. And I would like to say here as well that years ago, I started using a phrase, and I still do, that alongside the religious rules and laws, we can adopt science and technology. But as far as science and technology does not make religion subservient in any way. So the slaughtering, as far as the Muslims are concerned, they will do it the same way, and that is a humane way, as is being put down all the time, although in English there is no other word for this kind of animal welfare in there. But what I would say is this, that I remove my hat to the British government, that not now, but since 1953 Act, they have supported the Jewish and Muslim slaughter, and they will always do, and I know the European Union would do that as well.
Mirja, what's next for Denmark in terms of animal welfare and animal rights? What's the big fight now? I guess it's the pig industry, given what Dan Jorgensen has said. He's referred to the cruelty of pig farming in Denmark. I guess, is that the next big issue for you?
Yeah, well, we always focus on that. We've been done that for many years. At the moment, we actually focus on the zoo, on all the surplus that are being killed each year. That is our focus at the moment.
Great. Well, look, sadly, we've run out of time. Many thanks to my guests. Speaking to me there on the line from Denmark is Mirja Thompson, founder of the Organisation Against the Suffering of Animals. Here in the studio, I was joined by Ed West, who's the deputy editor of the Catholic Herald. He also writes for the Spectator. Shimon Cohen, who is the campaign director of Shechita UK, and also here in the studio, Masood Khawaja, who's director of Halal Consultations. Many thanks for joining me, Brendan Cole, on The Voice of Russia in London.